Ok, bueno, pues voy a presentar a nuestra primera ponente magistral del día. Vamos a hacer la presentación en inglés. So we have today here Dr. Susan Blackmore. She's a psychologist, lecturer, and writer best known for her book The Meme Machine from 1999 and the textbook Consciousness and Introduction. She's a visiting professor at the University of Plymouth in the UK. Her research interests includes memes, evolutionary theory, consciousness, NDEs, OBEs, free will, lucid dreams, sleep paralysis, drugs, psychedelics, spirituality, and meditation. She has written more than 60 academic papers and 100 contributions to books, and her works have been translated into 20 other languages. She has practiced Zen for 40 years and plays in a samba band. And well, let's welcome our keynote speaker.
Thank you very much.
So check this microphone. Do you want to put it here or you rather grab it?
Is that working? Yes, can you all hear me? Well, I am very excited to be here, and that will trouble me if this is working.
That's for the virtual.
Oh, okay. But can I walk around?
Yeah.
Are you sure? I don't want to cause trouble. If I put it here, because I need to see, because I haven't got a computer in front of me, so I need to see. Right. Well, I am very honoured to be invited to give the opening lecture, which is a bit of a responsibility. But I'm having a lovely time here in Mexico, my first time properly in Mexico. And I've chosen to talk about the greatest mystery that there is. That is consciousness. So good luck to me. So I have a question for all of you. Hands up if you're conscious now. Okay. Hands down. Hands up if you're not conscious when I ask the question. One. Okay. Be brave. Hands up if you're saying no, that you weren't conscious when I asked the question. One hand there. Was another one back there? Why did you put your hand up then?
No, I was distracted but conscious.
You was distracted. So we got no good answers here. Because there's something very strange about consciousness. I mean, if I suddenly go, now, I can sometimes catch people out. They realize they were somewhere off somewhere else. They weren't really here at all. So you all bravely say, well, it's not really, you all confidently say, of course I was conscious. Now, don't mix this up with being awake and sitting up and your eyes open. I don't mean that. I mean being here, being actually conscious. This is the mystery, this is the problem. So please, before I say any more words, just be conscious. That's what I'm talking about. And I'm emphasizing this at the start because so often I read things in the massive field now of consciousness studies where people are talking about some kind of cognitive process or some kind of function or some kind of mechanism and say they're talking about consciousness and they're not. If you want to make a distinction between access and phenomenal consciousness, I'm talking about phenomenal consciousness. Okay, so we can begin. Are you? Good. Here's a very odd thing about the field of consciousness studies. Or if you're having subtitles, this says, if you think you know what consciousness is, you probably haven't thought about it enough. You all put your hands up. I assume you immediately knew what I'm talking about, but I hope by the end of this lecture you will have some doubt. So, interesting field, consciousness studies. It has no definition. So what are we studying? We're studying consciousness. What is consciousness? We don't know. But, ta-da, we have lots and lots of theories. Ta-da. I don't expect you to look at the names of them, but here's one example down here. I think the date is hidden in there somewhere, and I don't remember. I think it's 2022, with 5 theories to compare. Here is another one up here this year. Fahadi's 7 different theories to compare. And we get to one of the best experts. This is Seth and Anil Seth and Bain. and they have 22 theories. Now, what do you do with a field with no definition and 22 theories? You know something's going wrong. Not going wrong in the sense of hopeless, but it's at that stage of the beginning when you're fumbling around and you don't know really what you're doing. So good, we have lots of theories, but I think they're all rubbish. Well, maybe they're not, but you can't tell at the moment. I'm very pleased that there has begun to be some adversarial collaboration where people from different theories have got together and said, right, let's agree that if this prediction comes out this way, your theory wins, and if it comes out this way, your theory wins. In particular, a big study comparing global workspace theory with integrated information theory. And not to my surprise, so far, none of the findings have confirmed one or other theory. So I'm simply saying that I think the field is in a big mess. And I think that we got it wrong from the very beginning. And that's what I want to talk about. I'm not going to go back to the ancient Greeks or the traditions before that, or even to the wonderful von Helmholtz and William James in the 19th century. But I want to start in 1989, and this should have allowed William James in, I think. But anyway, this is a very famous quote from Stuart Sutherland, a British psychologist, who said, "Consciousness is a fascinating but elusive phenomenon. It is impossible to specify what it is, what it does, or why it evolved. Nothing worth reading has been written on it." Well, of course, I've written a brilliant book on it now, so it's not true anymore. There are lots of things worth reading now. But I think he was right. And 1989 is of particular interest to me because I started teaching a consciousness course then. And it was difficult to find anything worth teaching the students. We had fun, but you know. And before that, I had already written a paper. Well, it wasn't really a paper, it was a conference presentation I was a parapsychologist in those days, looking for paranormal phenomena, psychic events, all that stuff, which I did for quite a long time. And I presented this paper at a parapsychology conference called "What is it like to be a mental model?" And I'm going to come back to that because it's an idea that has stayed with me. It came from my then early days of meditation practice, my experience with psychedelics and with cannabis, and mystical experiences that I had had spontaneously. And it came from some understanding of brain function, but I couldn't really make sense of it, and I abandoned the idea. But I was I was teaching this course, and suddenly the world changed because, well, the world is not going to change. Help, Alex! He's fallen asleep. Thank you. Was he conscious? So Dan Dennett's book, Consciousness Explained, appeared. And I was very lucky because I know some of you have heard of Richard Gregory, and my husband was working in his lab in those days. And Richard said to me, "I'm going to Oxford to hear Dan Dennett give a talk about his book. And we're going to go to Richard Dawkins' house, and we can go to, will you come with me? And we'll go to the lecture." So I was like, wow, yeah, okay, really exciting. And off we went to the lecture, and I was completely stunned by it. I read the book frantically for the days beforehand. How many of you have read Consciousness Explained? Good, excellent, quite a lot of you. I still think it's a brilliant book. I don't agree in the end with multiple drafts how he ends up. But what he does, for those of you who don't know his book, if you're interested in, please read it. It's tough going, but it's so good because he tears apart every ordinary assumption you make about consciousness, or at least he questions every assumption we normally make. And that, I think, we need. And then, so that was 1991. And then in 1994 came Francis Crick, the astonishing hypothesis. So what's astonishing? You're just a pair of neurons. Well, it needs saying in a way, because from my experiences in parapsychology, I think there's no such things, and no spirit, no soul, whatever. It needs saying that we have to look at brains and bodies and the world, and not go into, never mind all that. But it doesn't get us anywhere. I mean, that's, we're not just a pack of neurons. Well, enough, I won't say any more. It was an important book because I'll come back to something that we said in it. But I've said we have no definition. And what happened then? So we're talking about, let me just ignore that for a moment. We're talking in 1994. Something else happened in 1994, which was the first conference in Tucson, Arizona, which was then called Toward a Science of Consciousness, TSC. It's now called The Science of Consciousness, TSC, because we've got a real science now. That, I would say, marked the beginning of the modern field of consciousness studies. I was at TSC this year in Tucson. It's still going, and I'm sure we'll keep going. Anyone been to TSC? Yeah, great. Right, so no definition, a field starting out 30 years ago. What do? What in fact has happened is that people have gone back to, I expect most of you know why this picture's here, don't you? It is because of a famous paper by the philosopher Thomas Nagel. I'll wait till you've stopped doing the noise. Sorry. Thomas Nagel in 74, sorry. And the question, you can't read the question because it's underneath here. So what is the question? Ray, brilliant audience. What is it like to be a bat? Now, I think, well, I'll come on to what I think. There are two important things came out of this paper. Actually, what Nagel thought he'd done and wanted to do was to demolish materialism forever. And he didn't succeed in doing that. Nobody thinks he demolished materialism forever. But the two important things I think he did were, one, to say, if there's something it's like to be the bat, that's what we mean by being conscious. If there's nothing it's like to be the bat, or nothing it's like for the bat, then that's what we mean by not being conscious. It's a kind of statement of what we mean by phenomenality. The other thing that came out of it was, well, could I have a bat, please? Who would come and be a bat? Come on, some brave, come on. Oh, we got one behind you. Oh, let's have two bats. Come on, okay, come on. Yeah, yes, please, hang, yeah. And any noises or anything?
I don't know what happened.
Oh, we can't hear the noises because they're too squeaky, aren't they? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Jorge the bat. The point is, he can pretend to be a bat, but that doesn't tell us the answer. But let's suppose that he turns into a bat. Well, then he loses all language, doesn't he? And he comes back to being Jorge. He can't remember what it was like, and if he tries to tell us, that won't help either. So that, I think, is what came out of the question, that at least this is what we're talking about, what it's like to be a bat, but we can't know. I think we're going to lose a lot of my slides because of the translation, so no. It doesn't matter, I'm sure we can cope. But sometimes it can't go right off the pictures, can it? So. But then it's going to cut the head off the bat. Poor bat! We'll see whether it's better or not. So, The problem is, what is it like to be a bat? Immediately gives us two things. There's a physical bat. Here there is a material world with bats and men in it, and tables and chairs. And then there's what it's like to be the chairs and the man and the bat, and there's a problem. I love what the Victorians called the problem. They called it the great chasm that can never be crossed, the fathomless abyss. Probably in Spanish you don't know the word abyss, but it's like you look down and oh, you have the same word. Oh, okay, the fathomless, meaning you can't get to the bottom, which is perfect. And I blame this on Nagel's question, because if you see, this is just as bad. Whatever we do, we miss something. It doesn't matter, we'll cope. But it's the assumption that is the bat that is the subject of consciousness that leads us inexorably to the hard problem. The hard problem is just a modern version of the mind-body problem, which has been around a long time. So this also takes us to 1994. So I wasn't there in 94. The first Tucson I went to was 96. But in 1994, the then young Dave Chalmers, with his long flowing hair, very exciting young philosopher. He was very nervous. It was one of his first presentations at an important conference. And according to him, he went to give his presentation and it was all, written out and everything. And it was very complicated, philosophical, long words, that nobody remembers. And what he said at the beginning was, I'm going to give this paper, but I just want to explain that I'm not talking about the easy problems of cognition and thinking and remembering and perception and all that. I'm talking about the hard problem of consciousness itself. That's how the word, he didn't even mean to say this, it just kind of came out. That's where the phrase the hard problem came from. And really, in the field of consciousness studies, excuse me, the hard problem has become the holy grail of consciousness. People are all over the place trying to solve the hard problem. To some extent, they still are. Certainly, they're still talking about it. And Chalmers defined it as the question of how physical processes in the brain give rise to subjective experience. And he contrasted it with the easy problems. And he asked, why is the performance of these functions, that is cognition, memory, learning, blah, blah, accompanied by experience? Now, are you noticing something about this? It's emphasizing, it's creating the problem by the way it puts it. I want to emphasize, there's something funny. There we go. I want to emphasize these two things. The brain gives rise to subjective experience. In other words, we've got the fathomless abyss. On the one hand, we've got the brain, and there it is. He took it out just to show in the picture. And these functions that the brain does are accompanied by, come along with this other thing called consciousness. And this is why I'm saying we got it wrong at the start. This sounded fine. To many people, it still sounds fine. But I think it's not fine. It gets us tied up in the problem forever. And I want us to escape from the problem. So I'm going to solve it all and we're escape. No, I'm not. But I want to get out of this trouble. There's something very funny going on here. No, I think it's because there's a setting in different versions of PowerPoint where I put the different words in and it flicks back and forth. I've had the problem before. It's my fault. I should sort it out. It's not your fault. So, emphasizing this really, Chalmers says, and it seems so obvious, it is undeniable that some organisms are subjects of experience. Would you agree? Yeah, a lot of you agree. Well, I'm going to disagree. But this is a common assumption, that there must be something it's like to be a bat, the physical thing. The bat is conscious. You are conscious as a physical object. I'm saying you're not, see, I'm doing it again. Nagel makes the same assumption. He says the fact that an organism has conscious experience at all means basically that there is something it is like to be that organism. So, again, it is the physical object, the organism, that is the subject of consciousness. Now, this leads us to a problem. I forgot to I wanted to pick up a rock on the way in, and I wanted to steal a plant from somewhere, so that would be much better than using our imagination. But I want some hands up, please. I don't want this to take too long, so please put your hands up very firmly when I say so, if you think these things are conscious. Hands up if you think the rock, the stone, is conscious. No panpsychists at all. Oh, okay, hands up if you think the thermostat is conscious. No followers of McCarthy. Whoa. Okay, hands up if you think the flower, or maybe that Ficus benjamina I can see out there in the corridor. Hands up, about 10, maybe 12, a few more, you're thinking about it. Okay, a dozen maybe, okay. How many think that's a woodlouse? Some insect or something. Hands up if you think the woodlouse is conscious. A few more than with the plants. Okay. How many think the lovely, sweet little baby wabbit? Oh, dear little wabbit. Yes. Okay. Okay. Do that again, the rabbit, please. So that's nearly everybody. Okay. Was anybody not thinking the rabbit's conscious? One dodgy one and one definite one. And who thinks that the newborn baby is conscious? Right. Hands down, anyone said no to the last one? One person. Three think it isn't. Okay. Very interesting, that difference between the rabbit and the human. So, but the problem is...
So you should have don't know.
Well, I took these kind of hands like this to be... there were quite a few of those. So where would you say you don't know?
I don't really know whether the rabbit.
That is probably the best answer to all of them. Actually, we don't know. Because it's a stupid question. I would say we cannot know. So that's why I'm agreeing with you. But if we assume that physical things are conscious and that consciousness arises from those things, then we're tempted to find out. So again, you didn't hesitate. You had an answer, all of you. But how the hell are you going to find out? Well, it's very tempting to find out. I mean, there are moral and ethical questions about newborn babies and fetuses and animal welfare in farms. And there are real big questions here about suffering. Nevertheless, we get ourselves in a muddle. So people are trying to find out. This is an example from a paper earlier this year in TICS called Tests for Consciousness in Humans and Beyond. And they invented all these tests. It's called the marker approach. They said, I haven't got the quote here, but they said, we want to measure consciousness itself, not just the processes that accompany it, something like that. So they're imagining there's this thing called consciousness itself, or this process, or this force, or something or another. And, sorry, I've lost the plot, I'm very distractible. I really have, I'm gaga, I can't keep concentrating when things happen. So what they've done in the marker approach is to look for ways that they think would actually tell them whether something's conscious or not. But they're not getting at consciousness itself. So there's all these things, can they sniff something? Can they measure the perturbational complexity index, global effect text? They do various tests, hoping that kind of it will all add up. And then they make a list of all these things and decide which ones can tell them whether whatever organism is conscious. I think this is a great attempt, and it's really interesting, but it's just telling us again there is something wrong with the whole way we're thinking about consciousness. And for myself, I think that starts at the root of what is it like to be a physical thing. Now, I should say, I I am stretching my ideas here for your benefit, but also for my benefit, because I might be mad, I might be loopy, my ideas might be completely bonkers. Then you can tell me later, and that's what I will really appreciate if you do that. So let me proceed. So I think this takes us absolutely nowhere. The whole thing is bonkers. Maybe that's not a word you know in Spanish. It's stupid. Well, these little pictures were drawn by my son for the textbook that now is authored by my daughter and me. And I just love them. I love this American, we still don't know what it is that we're doing. So I want to present a completely new way of thinking about consciousness. And remember, we've already got 15 or more theories. So this is not a theory. It's more like, let's take a different look at what the problem is and see whether it takes us anywhere. I'm not yet sure. I have moods of going, wow, well, of course. And then moods of, no, you're really crazy. So this is fun to share the ideas with. So my suggestion is very simple. It is not physical objects that are conscious. Physical objects do not have consciousness. Consciousness is not something that arises from brain processes or brains. It is not something that is generated by brains or produced by brains. That's the problem. If you say that, you've got a hard problem and you can't solve it. So my suggestion is that it is only the active mental models that the brains create, and possibly artificial systems, that are the subject of consciousness. So when Jorge was being a bat, he was sort of thinking, oh, I don't know, what's it like to be a bat? And the subjects of consciousness there were all the models that went into that activity, the feeling of his arms and down right through the system, all of them conscious. If you like, I'm proposing a panpsychism of models. And all active mental models are conscious. That's the point of what I'm doing today, the whole point. Now, there are some advantages to this, which is why I keep going with the idea. Because remember that I'm going back to my 1986 conference presentation, in which I asked the question, what is it like to be a mental model? And all these years, which is now almost 40 years, I had no idea. I think I got this a bit wrong. I had no idea what a mental model could possibly be. But in terms of the advantages, if you ask what is it like to be a bat, you can't answer. But if you ask what is it like to be a mental model, the answer is absolutely bloody obvious and staring you in the face. It's whatever the model says it's like. That's what a model is. So let us look out at the trees now. Every one of you, if you're obedient and doing what you're not looking, you're looking at the trees. This brain in your head is constructing a model of the window, the wall, probably paying a lot more attention to the trees because I've told you to, and a bit less to the surround, and probably not thinking about your bottom on the seat at all, but you could do and shift your attention. That's what it is like to be you now, because you are a model and the brain is modeling you looking at the trees. So I would say the answer is, what is it like? It's like whatever the model says it's like. That, to my mind, is the core of what I'm talking about, and is what the idea that I want to get over and I want us all to think about. If we ask, here's another advantage, if we ask which of these is conscious, then we don't look for some markers of their consciousness or look for something being exuded or produced by their brains. We ask, what are their brains modeling? In principle, at least, neuroscience can tell us that. We can look into, with more and more detail as we are doing in neuroscience, and find out what any organism is capable of modeling. I mean, the woodlouse, for example, will be modeling the ground it's walking over, the chemical changes it's looking for, anything that's relevant it will be making models. But of course, the stone won't. So I am not a bottom-up panpsychist. I would say the stone doesn't do any modeling. It's not interacting with the world by making any model at all. The thermostat's not much of a model, is it? It's either too hot or too cold. But the plants, and where their roots connecting with other plants and all of those kind of things, well, maybe there's more. I don't know how much we can find out about that, but in principle, there is an answer. That's what's important to me. And we can abandon the search for the neural correlates of consciousness. Now, I expect you all know something about the neural correlates of consciousness. This has been the major research thrust through the whole field since 1994. And why 1994? Because that was when Francis Crick made the start of this whole endeavor in that book, The Astonishing Hypothesis. He said, and this sounds like a really sensible thing to say, he said, when you have a difficult problem, don't start with theories. Note how much we're doing theories, but don't start with theories. Start with correlations. So you look for a correlation between consciousness and the underlying neural processes. And that's what people have been doing for 30 years, looking for the neural correlates of consciousness. He and Christoph Koch defined it as the minimum neural mechanisms jointly sufficient for any one specific conscious experience. So you're imagining a specific experience and looking in the brain for what always correlates with it, jointly sufficient. So I expect you know about those experiments originally with monkeys and later with humans and more sophisticated neuroscience, doing things like looking at bistable images, Necker cubes, whatever. When the animal is conscious of one way the thing flips, then you see some things happening, and it's conscious of the other, you see something different happening, even though the stimulus is identical all the time. Ta-da! Yeah, but it doesn't really help. Because what you find is all the different stages up the visual system. If you're using visual images, yeah, things are flipping. But there's attention, and we were talking about attention last night. There's attention flipping. There's different amounts of processing going on. There's eye movements, looking at different parts of the image. And a long time later, so 2016, Koch and colleagues have concluded that there's a shift away from the broad frontoparietal network towards a more restricted posterior, blah, blah, blah. And in this paper, they discuss two popular candidate physiological markers of consciousness have not shown any predictive power. I am not surprised, because what they're doing is incoherent. It's what arises when you think in terms of the hard problem. So this leads to implications for neuroscience. The neuroscience we have is fantastic. I'm not dishing it. I'm saying we need to look at it in a different way, asking different questions. So instead of looking for the neural correlates of specific conscious experiences, we ask what is any system modeling. And if you take my modeling panpsychism view, all of the mental models in a system are subjects of experience. So it's not that there's this little bit is a conscious process and this little bit is an unconscious process. Note that right throughout most of the theories we have, that distinction is just assumed. Global workspace theory, unconscious processing gets into the global workspace and it becomes conscious. Ta-da! Magic. There are other ways of looking at global workspace theory, but I won't go into that. But there are so many ways in which people talk about processes or areas of the brain becoming conscious, entering consciousness. And I think that is wrong because they're all conscious in the first place, because that's what it is to be a mental model. But hang on a minute. What is it? This time I'm asking, what is a mental model? Because back all those decades ago, when I was a young parapsychologist believing in impossible things and having all my hopes dashed by the evidence, I was still thinking this way, but I had no idea what a mental model could be. And please note, I am not trained as a philosopher. I struggled with, well, what is a thought? What is it, and I couldn't get anywhere with it at all. But things have changed. And that is, sorry, I was making a new slide in a panic last night, and I wanted to put these different things in. What I'm talking about is the advent of predictive processing, Bayesian brain hypothesis, the controlled hallucination, the beast machine, active inference. They're all talking about the same kind of thing. I pressed the button twice, there we are. Now, I have borrowed this slide from, you can't see him, in the top there is Shamil Chandaria. Does anyone know of his work? Yes, two of you. Not easy to find. He's not written, as far as I know, he's not written a book. I can't find any first author publications of him really explaining this, but there are lots of his lectures online. This particular one, and you can't read the title up there, but it's the Bayesian brain and consciousness or something like that. But if you want to find it, look for Chandaria Oxford Talks, and you'll find it easily. So what we're talking about here, I think you'll have to move. Sorry, I'm trying to. Stopped working, Alex. Yeah, I wanted to go back. That's his name there, and now it's gone twice. Oh, stop it! That's what I want. Thank you. So, can you get rid of the translation for a minute or not? Thank you. You need to see this picture. I will speak slowly and you can have the translation back. The idea of predictive processing is that the brain, human brain, any brain, is a massively hierarchical system. And so we've got these different layers. If you want to put it back, you could put it at the bottom. We just need to see the picture, really. Yeah. Oh dear. Oh, I must steam ahead. Okay. So the idea is that there is a mass hierarchy. At the bottom levels, the big fat picture he's got here, thank you, is all sensory processing in all the different senses. You might imagine the lowest level being lines and edges and all that Hubel and Wiesel stuff in V1, going up to color processing, object recognition, temporal lobe, face recognition, and houses and whatever. And then in the middle you'll have so you had priors, your expectations coming down, meeting the sensory input coming up, and at the very top, huge model of the self who's in charge of the whole thing, or so it seems. At every level of this hierarchy, the neurons are trying to predict the input coming from the next level below. And how many of you know quite a bit about predictive processing? A few. Okay, so I'm explaining this in kind of very simple terms. Forgive me, those who are experts. So you can imagine, this goes back to Helmholtz's unconscious inference, Richard Gregory's perceptions as hypotheses. And the idea is, all the inactive theories, because what the brain is doing is actively seeking to understand the world. It's making hypotheses about, well, what is the best explanation for what I'm finding coming in from the level below? And then the next level above that will be doing the same. And the next level above that, all the way up. All the time theorizing, if you like. And this explains something that Richard Gregory was kind of obsessed with. He kept worrying about it. That if you look in the brain, and this has been known for a long time, there are far more efferent, going outward neurons than ones coming in. How can that be? This is one of the things that then demolishes this natural idea that somehow the information comes into our brain, goes in our eyes, goes up through the optic nerve, gets up somewhere, it gets to the top, and da-da, becomes conscious. That can't be true. Then you get the homunculus. Somebody, a little thing inside has to look at that, and so on and so on. It can't be. Well, what can it be? Now we know, because the maths, the approximations to Bayesian formulae can tell us how this is done. So this is what a mental model is, in my opinion, is what I'm working with, is that all throughout the brain, endless active, ever-changing models are being constructed in order to reduce free energy, or in order really to reduce surprise. So that the brain at every level is as little surprised by what's coming in as possible. And all that goes into the brain is the error messages, the bits of surprise. And so that's why it's so active. That's why we're actively perceiving and using the information to constantly update what our expectations. So that's why I wrote at the bottom of this, all these mental models are conscious. And you could say it's a kind of representational panpsychism, but if someone's got a better name for this, I'd love to have it, please. Now, at the top here, and I'm not sure that there's actually a top, but somewhere with a lot of complex priors from a lifetime of growing up, learning language and everything else, is this conceptual framework of me. And I think I pressed the button in my excitement there. I am a model of something that doesn't exist. I am conscious. I am the subject, like I've been saying. All the models are conscious. Well, this is a massive, great, huge one. And we mistake it for something else. We think that there's a soul or a spirit. We may not use those terms, but we think there's a conscious entity inside the brain that has consciousness and has free will and controls what it does and all of that. And it's all fantasy. This is where I disagree with Dennett, who believes in free will. God knows why. So I like Metzinger's view. Selves just seem to be real and continuous because we confuse our phenomenal self model with what it represents. I first met, I'm tempted by these asides and I might steal a couple minutes more, but I met him first in 1985 when he came to visit me. I lived in Germany, and he's German. He came to visit me to tell me I was wrong about out-of-body experiences, that something really does leave the body because he's had the experiences and he knows. And that was how our long friendship started. And of course he failed, and he agrees now, and he's developed the idea of the self model tremendously in all his works. So, with thinking this way allows us to drop the idea that some brain processes are conscious and others aren't. I talked about that already. We don't need that idea anymore because they're all conscious, every single one. And we get out of that problem. I replace that with the idea that when we say, what's conscious? What are you conscious of? What are you conscious of? It's what processes are going on in that brain or that brain that become part of the self-model. So when you were looking at the trees, the modeling of trees was probably faintly going on, very, very low precision weighting, very little attention going on to it, but suddenly it becomes part of the self-model. I'm looking at the trees. And that makes a deep difference to the way we're thinking about consciousness. Now, I've only got about 3 minutes left, but I want to use this. And I knew I would say too much, and I always try to cram too much in, but I'll have to just float these ideas, and maybe we can talk about them later. But altered states of consciousness, it's not, in this view, there's this stuff called consciousness that changes, but the modeling changes. So the models of ourselves in the world with psychedelics, for example, where we know such exciting things going on in psychedelic research, when we know that there's disorganized activity in the visual system. What?
No, the subtitle for...
Oh, it doesn't. Well, unless you need the paper. Don't worry. It's just if we know that the long-range connections that sustain the default mode network with all its self processes, that those are disrupted, and then there's disorganized activity in visual cortex, then we can say, what is it like to be on LSD? What is it like to be tripping on mushrooms or whatever? I can't make it go again.
Fíjate la presentación para que...
You can turn.
Oh, thank you. So briefly, I spent a lot of my research life, as I told someone last night, I've never had a lab, I've never been a proper researcher, you know, I just do this stuff in whatever way I can. But I did a lot of research on out-of-body experiences, I've had it myself. Now what's happening there, amazingly, we know that nothing leaves the body. There isn't something to leave. And we know how it's produced. So it's important to remember the definition of an OBE is an experience in which you seem to perceive the world from a location outside the physical body. That allows you to be completely neutral about the theory. I mean, if you believe in astral projection, this is still the best definition. You seem to perceive the world from up there. Maybe that's because you're in your astral body, but maybe it's not. Maybe it is actually because there's a disruption to your body schema. Every creature that moves needs a body schema. I don't know about trees and their roots. I doubt it, but I don't know. But we could find out. Body schema in the temporoparietal junction. This is a brilliant study in Nature in 2002 with someone who had subdural electrodes, and Olaf Lanke could produce and control out-of-body experiences in this patient by fine electrical stimulation in the right temporal lobe, temporoparietal junction. So we know that, but I'm not going to go on about this because I want to say a little bit about meditation before I stop. Meditation is very interesting. So, sorry, I'm rushing now. I'll slow down and he'll have to kill me. The out-of-body experience is interesting to me because people think of it as being a spiritual experience in many ways. I would think it's not, or at least it's the tiniest step to changing the self-model. It is this great self-model that is the root of suffering. That is what causes the trouble. Dennett calls it a benign user illusion. But what about it being a malign user illusion? What about it being actually troublesome? Well, that depends on what kind of illusion you have. How much you cling to the idea that I'm in here, I'm conscious, I've got free will, I'm important, I'm the one who's suffering, poor me. Or how much you are able to see it's just models. It's not me against the world. It's not me in here and the world out there, because we have no idea what the world is. All we have is the models. We live as a model in a world of models. Something must, I'm not going into metaphysics here because I can't. I'm not capable. I think there's something out there. People like Bernard Kastrup thinks it's all mental all the way down. I don't know. All I know is this is models. And the self is depicted as the one who is conscious of them. So disrupting the body schema is just one small step to realizing that you don't have to be stuck in your head. But it's not of itself a spiritual experience. But if you undertake a long spiritual journey and you meditate a lot, then things can really change. How many of you here meditate or meditate fairly regularly? Good, nearly half maybe. Oh yeah, slowly going up. Okay, half. This is also Chandarya, who talks about how as you go through stages of meditation, you're taking the top levels off. Now one more, I think I've only got 2 more slides, so I hope you'll let me carry on a bit. And we're going back again to the mid-80s, because I can remember the cottage I lived in. And one night I was sitting there stoned out of my head with a friend, and I had this amazing realization. You have to take the top layers off. I wrote it down in my special notebook I keep for brilliant ideas. But I had no idea what it meant. Really, I had no idea, but it just rang some bell, you know? But of course, I know exactly what it means now. It makes perfect sense. So what you're doing in continuous practice, either within a session of meditation going down, 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 or over the years as meditation becomes more natural, the top bits, which we need for walking around the world, complicated models, top-down models, they let go of, and things become quieter. And what stays, well, depends how far you go down. But at the very, very lowest levels, there is still stuff, there's still information coming in. But even, I would say, in some experiences, even the time and space in which they happen disappears. There's still something happening, but so this is a way of thinking about it. And Chandaria talks about what happens when you come back from such deep states. As you find the reconstruction coming, it makes it more obvious that it's just models, that these are just thoughts, that I'm just a thought. And therefore the whole process of letting go of it all and then building it back up again, which you do in meditation, in many traditions of meditation practice, is makes sense. And this is my final thought. I'm particularly interested in the jhanas. And these are a series of 8 increasingly concentrated states, well, they're deep states achieved through concentration. And I started jhanas practice, I was trying to remember last night, I can't remember, maybe 6, 7 years ago, with a teacher called Lee Brasington. And these come from the Pali Canon, the early Buddhist scriptures, but they were around before even the Buddha. They were part of the esoteric practices that people were doing back then. So the first one, you have to get really concentrated first. You have to get access consciousness and access concentration and do various stuff. But the first one is like this amazing energy, zzz, like, and you kind of get a bit twitchy and a bit weird, and it's associated with glee and intent. My own teacher says you just smile like hell, like, and feel this. Your whole body has to be suffused with this energy. Now, his theory is that this is a self-induced dopamine rush, and there is some evidence for that. So this is not, I mean, it's called PT. It has different names in different traditions, but my way of thinking about it is we'll find out what is actually going on. But what you do is then you use this energy to drop down into a more ordinary kind of happiness called sukha. And this is mixed with the PT, which then dissipates, but you're still being able to use with this practice to drop down into gentle contentment when everything is fine and the energy has drifted away. Then you get into jhana 4, which is very deep peacefulness. I'm not very good at jhana 4. Jhana 5 I had by accident, and I know other people occasionally have aspects of these by accident. Infinite space. There's nothing in it, but there's still space. And infinite consciousness. Now that, I think, also I had at the same time following on from that. There's kind of this sense that there's something aware of you, but you've lost any sense of you anyway, but there's something aware there. So there's kind of a generalized awareness, a non-dual awareness, something like that. Then infinite no-thingness, God knows what that is. And finally, you can't see that. The last one is neither perception nor non-perception, and I have no idea what that is. Is there anyone here who does jhanas practice? Yes? Yeah, good. We can have a chat about it later. So these are all, I would say, taking those layers of a predictive processing machine away. And if time and space, I mean, they go away, they are constructions too. And this changes the self, and then as the self can come back, as I said before with these other traditions, it becomes more and more obvious that you're not a separate thing in here with the physical world out there. But a hell of a big mystery still remains. So, I have not solved a hard problem, but then it's insoluble, so that's okay. I suspect that really all I have done is to replace the hard problem with the universe problem. What is it? I don't know. So, that's it. What is it like being you? Enjoy. Thank you.